December 6, 1991. It was a cold, ordinary Friday night in Austin, Texas. Inside an I can't believe it's yogurt shop on West Anderson Lane, closing time was fast approaching. Behind the counter, two teenage employees, 17-year-old Eliza Thomas and 17-year-old Jennifer Harbison, were sweeping up and wiping down the machines. They were joined by Jennifer's younger sister, 15-year-old Sarah Harbison, and her friend, 13-year-old Amy Ayers. They were just ordinary teenagers, laughing, chatting, and looking forward to the weekend. They had no idea that a monster was sitting right outside in the dark. Just before midnight, an Austin police patrolman noticed smoke pouring from the roof of the yogurt shop. He immediately called it in, and firefighters rushed to the scene. They tore through the doors, battling a raging, intense fire that filled the building with thick, toxic black soot. It initially looked like a tragic electrical fire or a freak accident, but as the smoke began to clear and the firefighters made their way to the back storage room, they stumbled upon a scene of unimaginable horror. Stacked together in the back of the store were the charred bodies of the 4 young girls. But this wasn't an accidental fire. It was a calculated, brutal execution. All 4 girls had been bound, gagged with their own clothing, and shot in the back of the head execution style. Even worse, forensic evidence would later reveal that at least 3 of the young girls had been brutally sexually assaulted before they were killed. The killer or killers had intentionally set the shop on fire using an accelerant, hoping the flames would incinerate every piece of physical evidence and erase their crimes forever. The news sent shockwaves through the city of Austin and the entire state of Texas. This was a brutal, cold-blooded crime, unlike anything the community had ever seen. Parents stopped letting their kids walk home alone. Local businesses closed early, and a heavy, suffocating cloud of fear fell over the city. The Austin Police Department launched one of the largest, most intense investigations in Texas history. Lead Detective John Jones and a massive task force processed the charred crime scene for days. But the arson had done its job. The extreme heat, water from the fire hoses, and thick soot made gathering usable fingerprints or traditional evidence nearly impossible. Despite the lack of physical evidence, tips flooded in by the thousands. Over the next few years, investigators pursued every single lead to a dead end. Desperate to solve the case, police entertained over 50 different confessions from various criminals, local drifters, and even high-profile serial killers like Kenneth Allen McDuff. But none of the details matched the hidden specifics of the crime scene. Years bled into more years, and the case grew agonizingly cold. For nearly 8 years, the families of Eliza, Jennifer, Sarah, and Amy lived in a state of perpetual torture, wondering if justice would ever come. Then, in 1999, a newly formed yogurt shop murder task force decided to revisit an old lead from the very first week of the investigation. Days after the murders back in 1991, a 16-year-old boy named Maurice Pierce had been arrested at a local mall carrying a .22 caliber handgun, the exact same caliber used to kill some of the girls. Back then, he and his friends had been questioned and released, but now, 8 years later, the task force put a bullseye squarely on Maurice Pierce and his 3 teenage friends, Forrest Wellborn, Michael Scott, and Robert Springsteen. What followed remains one of the most controversial chapters in Texas legal history. The young men were brought into isolated interrogation rooms and subjected to grueling, relentless pressure by detectives. Later court documents would reveal that investigators used incredibly unethical, high-pressure tactics. Detectives allegedly withheld food, kept them awake for hours, and at one point, a detective even held a gun directly to Michael Scott's head, demanding a confession. Broken, exhausted, and terrified for their lives, Michael Scott and Robert Springsteen finally snapped. They signed confessions detailing how they and their friends committed the heinous crime, even implicating each other. Armed with these confessions and absolutely zero physical evidence linking them to the store, the police declared the case solved. Forrest Wellborn was not indicted due to a lack of evidence, and the charges against Maurice Pierce were eventually dropped, though he still spent 3 years in jail. However, Robert Springsteen and Michael Scott were put on trial convicted of murder, and Springsteen was sentenced to death. The public breathed a sigh of relief, believing the monsters were finally behind bars. But the state's case was a house of cards, built on coerced words, and it didn't take long to fall apart. In 2006 and 2008, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals completely overturned the convictions of both Springsteen and Scott. The court ruled that prosecutors had flagrantly violated the U.S. Constitution by using portions of the co-defendants' confessions against each other without allowing their defense attorneys to cross-examine them. The prosecutors vowed to retry the men, confident they could secure another conviction. But then a massive roadblock emerged: science. By the late 2000s, forensic DNA testing had advanced significantly. Defense lawyers demanded that the physical evidence collected from the bodies of the victims back in 1991 finally be tested using modern methods. When the results came back, they sent a shock wave through the district attorney's office. A distinct profile of male DNA had been successfully extracted from one of the victims, and it did not match Robert Springsteen. It did not match Michael Scott. It didn't match Maurice Pierce, Forrest Wellborn, or anyone else the police had ever accused. The state was forced to release Springsteen and Scott from prison in 2009. They were free, but they weren't cleared. They lived under a dark cloud of suspicion for the next 15 years, with prosecutors insisting they were still guilty. While Springsteen and Scott tried to rebuild their broken lives, the trauma of the case claimed a tragic, fatal victim. Maurice Pierce, the man whose initial arrest triggered the 1999 investigation, had never truly escaped the shadow of the yogurt shop narrative. He came home from his 3 years in jail, a hardened, profoundly anxious man. His family maintained that local law enforcement continued to harass and shadow him for years. In 2010, the tension reached a horrific climax. Pierce was pulled over by an Austin police officer for a routine traffic stop. Paralyzed by fear and convinced he was being framed or sent back to prison for a crime he didn't commit, Pierce panicked and fled on foot. During the ensuing chase, a violent struggle occurred. Police stated that Pierce grabbed the officer's knife and stabbed him in the neck. The officer drew his weapon and shot Pierce, killing him. In a heartbreaking twist revealed years later, Pierce's young daughter was actually on the phone with him during his final moments, listening as her father panicked, said goodbye, and took his last breath. Maurice Pierce died a marked man, decades before the world would learn the absolute truth. The case languished in legal limbo for over a decade. In 2020, forensic teams managed to optimize the crime scene DNA profile, expanding it from 16 markers to a highly detailed 25 markers. This complete profile allowed the FBI to conclusively eliminate the 4 original suspects once and for all. But who did the DNA belong to? The turning point came in 2022, when Austin Police Detective Daniel Jackson took over the cold case. He refused to let the file gather dust. In June 2025, Jackson took a closer look at a .380 caliber cartridge casing that had been recovered from a drain at the yogurt shop crime scene back in 1991. It hadn't been run through the National Integrated Ballistic Information Network in years, and ballistic imaging software had dramatically improved. When Jackson ran the casing, he got an immediate, shocking hit to an unsolved 1998 homicide case in Kentucky. Recognizing a pattern, Detective Jackson issued an urgent, nationwide search across every single forensic laboratory database in the United States. On August 22, 2025, the South Carolina State Laboratory returned a monumental result. They found a perfect Y-STR DNA match in their database from a brutal 1990 sexual assault and murder case in Greenville, South Carolina. The DNA belonged to a man named Robert Eugene Brashers. To confirm the match, investigators went back to the original evidence from 1991 and retested DNA found beneath the fingernails of 13-year-old victim Amy Ayers. The result was definitive. There was a 2.5 million to 1 probability that the genetic material belonged to Robert Eugene Brashers. Brashers was a prolific, terrifying serial killer and rapist who had traveled across the country committing horrific crimes, completely undetected for a decade, but investigators couldn't arrest him. In January 1999, Brashers had committed suicide during a violent standoff with police in Missouri. He had taken his secrets to the grave until the science of 2025 dug them back up. On September 29th, 2025, the Austin Police Department held an extraordinary press conference, officially naming Robert Eugene Brashers as the true perpetrator of the 1991 Texas yogurt shop murders. The announcement shattered 34 years of theories, false narratives, and institutional denial. With the true killer finally identified, the wheels of justice turned rapidly to right a massive wrong. On February 19, 2026, a Texas judge formally declared Robert Springsteen, Michael Scott, Maurice Pierce, and Forrest Wellborn completely innocent, officially wiping their records clean and fully exonerating them of the crimes. The legal vindication was followed by an unprecedented financial acknowledgement. In May 2026, the city of Austin agreed to a massive $35 million settlement to be split among the exonerated men and their families. Maurice Pierce's widow, Kimberly, and his daughter, Marissa, received a $10 million share. But for them, the victory was bittersweet. Kimberly Pierce publicly stated that they view the money as blood money, emphasizing that Maurice paid for it with his life. The families of the exonerated men are now pushing for sweeping institutional reforms, including mandatory child advocates during juvenile interrogations and strict bans on deceptive police tactics, hoping to ensure that no other family ever has to endure the nightmare they lived through for over 3 decades. The Texas yogurt shop murders will forever stand as a sobering landmark in the annals of true crime, a stark reminder of how easily tunnel vision and coercive tactics can derail the pursuit of truth, destroying innocent lives while a serial predator walks free. While the families of Eliza, Jennifer, Sarah, and Amy can never get their girls back, the scientific breakthroughs of 2025 and 2026 have finally pulled the truth into the light. The mystery is over. The names of the innocent have been cleared. What do you think about the incredible journey to solve this case and the massive reforms being proposed in Texas? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. If you found this deep dive into this historic case meaningful, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our deep dive true crime investigations. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.